shooting for many years. He's out of Dallas, Texas. He was originally born in Rome, New York, and one of the most amazing landscape photographers I have ever seen. With a show entitled Images That Happen When You Connect with Nature, let me introduce Mike Mezeul II to the Nikon Theater stage.
Hey, appreciate it, brother. How you guys doing? Everybody awake? Enjoying CES? Awesome. Well, I hope you guys are ready to nerd out. First off, I'd like to thank Nikon for having me out here and allowing me to share the stage with so many incredible photographers. Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, "Adopt the pace that nature has. Her secret is patience." And that is so key when it comes to landscape photography. You know, you're not always going to go out there and hit a home run. You know, sometimes you may get skunked by the weather. You may accidentally forget to hit your alarm clock. And sometimes you go out there and just can't find a composition worth shooting. But it takes the right mindset and the right amount of dedication, and most of all, having fun going out and shooting. If you're not having fun, that's going to reflect in your images. So if I go out there and say like I get skunked in, I'm going to go and look for another composition. I love exploring, so I'm going to get out there, I'm going to meander around, find new paths, and that curiosity helps spark a new interest of what could be around the corner and what images could be had in another adventure. So over the next 30 minutes or so with you guys, I'm going to share some of my favorite landscape images with you all. But first off, you know, getting out in nature, I want you guys to all think about this. For me, getting out in nature, what does it mean? It means to free your mind and your body, to escape from your televisions, from your phones, from your computers, to enjoy the best show and the most free show that we have, and that's right outside our door. To get outside in nature as a photographer, that means to find the unique moments that most people tend to overlook and to take advantage of them, create images that will get shared and help inspire others to get out into nature. So, you guys ready? Yeah, you guys are kind of quiet. You guys ready? Yeah, all right, cool. So, let's talk about what it takes to get out of bed. First off, an alarm clock and the will to go where most other people don't want to. And I don't mean they don't want to. This is Lake Louise up in Banff National Park in Canada, probably one of the most visited touristy spots that you could have. But this is Lake Louise in Banff National Park in Canada after waking up at 4:30 in the morning, driving an hour there, wading through a couple feet of snow, and standing in -5°F weather like this, and hoping that the gray skies that are covering everywhere that you can see break. And photography is all about light. So if you get 1 minute of good light, that makes it totally worthwhile. So here I am, 3 minutes of good sunrise light. I much rather would have been in bed with a nice warm blanket or say a hot chocolate, but this 3 minutes of light made every little bit of effort worthwhile. Afterwards, I went and thawed out and had a nice coffee. It also means going places that most people really don't want to go to, like a frozen lake, and a freshly frozen lake at that. This is also in the Canadian Rockies. And I wanted to go out on the lake, it was -14°F, by the way, and find these frozen methane bubbles. And now only a photographer would meander out on the lake looking for little bubbles trapped in ice. But I did that and went out there, and I was so excited when I finally found them that I forgot the #1 rule: be safe. Well, I got the shot, got the foreground exactly how I wanted, got the beautiful light on the mountain. Well, when I stepped away, I stepped to my right, which is the way I didn't come, and I started walking. That was much thinner ice. I stepped on that ice, it cracked out beneath me, and after a fresh pair of underwear, I was actually guided off the ice by a local gentleman who Tom, if you're watching, thank you so much because you saved my butt. When I first started landscape photography, I went out there and I thought it was all about having, a wide-angle lens and looking for the pretty sky and hoping that, it would be a nice shot. But the more time I spent in nature, I started seeing compositional elements come to life, like leading lines and patterns and symmetry. This shot right here is also from the Canadian Rockies on a much more frozen lake. And this shot right here, a lot of people think is a aerial shot. It's not. That crack in the ice is only an inch wide. And normally I would have walked right past that, but I learned over the years to look for small details like that. And I was able to get down low, 14 millimeters, and I did a technique called focus stacking, where I focused on the closest focus point and focused multiple points all the way out through infinity, and then stitched it together for a really nice depth of field in post. Moving to warmer places, Death Valley National Park is one of my favorite national parks to shoot. It's not too far down the road here. I walked out there after a flood that happened a few months prior in search of these mud cracks. I knew if I found them with a wide-angle lens, they would give me some beautiful leading lines and some nice patterns. So I hiked 13 miles to find these stupid cracks that were 500 feet from the car in the wrong direction when I got back. So I scouted, next morning went back, marked it on my GPS, much easier hike, got a beautiful sunrise, did the same technique here, 14 millimeters, real low to really help bring that foreground to life, and did a focus stack all the way out to the horizon. Death Valley, if you haven't been there as a photographer, is pretty much kind of like Narnia. There are so many different elements out there that can make for exciting photographs. This is Badwater Basin, full of amazing patterns. Now, if you're not a photographer, I don't recommend going there because you need to walk out to Badwater Basin, go, this is cool, it's really flat, when's lunch? Photographers, you're gonna run around like a complete nerd out there and find all these different elements for your images, and it's so cool because you could look over here and find these patterns and know, hey, this will be perfect when these crepuscular rays come down over here, or this will be perfect when the sky comes to life with the pastels at sunset. The Death Valley Mesquite sand dunes, some of my favorite places to hang out. This was a sunrise morning. I went out there in hopes of getting a nice sunrise, which the sunrise gods blessed me with. Found this beautiful ridge, had a nice element, a nice leading line throughout the frame. And the sky lit up beautifully, and I'll never forget how the light peeked over the horizon and filled the whole valley with this nice golden light, and all of a sudden all those dunes just came to life with different shapes. But it's not always pretty out there. I mean, this is pretty, but this is me having horrible planning and ending up in Death Valley in the sand dunes with 50 to 60 mile an hour winds for an hour. I would tell you the photographs here are awesome. What was even more awesome was the sexy skin that I had after being exfoliated for an hour by those winds out there. It was awesome. But when I was out there, I know, hey, this was a mistake. Or I was thinking it was a mistake because my gear I thought was going to be trashed. But I tried to make the best of it by shooting these dunes as being completely ripped apart by the winds. And I was trying to do long exposures out there to capture some motion, but it was really tough because the winds were so strong it was shaking the tripod. So I was able to get about a 1 second long exposure to capture some motion in the sand. And that was about it. I really would have liked to try a little bit longer, but it just wasn't possible with the winds being so strong. I was scared. I was really scared because I knew when I got back, I had just trashed my camera. My Nikon pitch black camera, normally got back to the room, it looked like one of the sand dunes. Took it apart. There was actually no sand or whatsoever or dust or anything like that inside the sensor, which was awesome. One of the things that I like to do when I'm out in nature, though, is push the envelope a little bit. And I've always had a fascination with severe weather, which you'll see in a little bit, and volcanoes. So when I heard that the Kilauea volcano in Hawaii had accessible lava, I immediately booked a flight out there. When I got out there, I realized I'm from Texas. We don't have volcanoes. I have no idea what I'm doing. So the first thing I'm going to do is book a boat charter to get close to the lava, and hopefully that'll allow me to get some really nice images of the lava without dying. So went out there, got some nice shots, but this wasn't what I went there for. I wanted to get closer. When I'm out there in these landscapes, I want the people that are looking at the images to actually feel like they're there as well. So I knew I had to hike out to any sort of lava that I could get to on foot. 13 miles later, I was able to get to the Poly and get up close and personal with lava. Now, this was terrifying for a couple of reasons. One, I was really bad at the game The Floor is Lava when I was a kid, so going out on a real volcano didn't have a good feeling inside. But also, getting out there and shooting was extremely difficult because the lava, I don't know if you guys know this, lava's hot. I could only get so close before I started to fear for the quality of my gear, the condition of my gear, and also the fact that I couldn't touch my tripod because it would heat up so hot that it would burn me if I left my tripod there too long. So these shots are 24 millimeters and as close as I could get. This is about 4 feet from the lava. And I'm really happy with how this image turned out because the lava has some beautiful color contrast to it, great detail, and it also kind of flows nicely through the frame. So I was extremely happy when I got this shot, but I try to tell people when you go out into nature, it doesn't just end when the sun goes down. Stay outside, enjoy the stars. 80% of this world does not get to see the Milky Way because of light pollution. So I stayed out there, and what happened next, I did not think would ever happen in my life. So I was able to get this shot here. This is not a composite. It is one frame. It's the Milky Way, lava, the moon, and Captain Scott Kelly. No, I'm just kidding, that's not him. That is a meteor going by as well. All that's missing is a unicorn off in the distance. Now, when I shot this image, I had a couple of issues. One was balancing out the exposure between the lava and the Milky Way, and then the exposure between the Milky Way and the moon. And what happened is luck was on my side that night. I had a quarter moon, which doesn't put off a lot of ambient light, so it didn't wash out the Milky Way. That lava there, you see, is underneath the crust there, so it's actually just barely coming through. So it was able to balance out nicely, and the meteor was just luck. Once again, the Milky Way is one of my favorite night sky subjects to shoot. I usually try and shoot it with some sort of foreground, something to tell a story. This image here is of a hoodoo in Badlands National Park in South Dakota. I used a Nikon SB900 speed light behind it to help illuminate the hoodoo and bring out some depth to it. These are the Texas bluebonnets. They are amazing. If you've never been down to Texas, this is pretty much the only flowers that we have down there. But I went out one night and did a 8-image focus stack underneath the Milky Way with these bluebonnets. And I used a very dim setting on my SB900 with a diffuser on it to help illuminate the bluebonnets here. And sometimes you get really, really lucky too with the Milky Way, as you saw before. Got lucky with this shot as well. This is in White Sands National Park, or National Monument, sorry, in New Mexico. It is the sand dunes, and there's a really funny story behind this, so catch me after. I won't have time to tell it now, but there's a really funny story as to why I was up at 2 a.m. in White Sands. It's the sand dunes, 2 cloud-to-ground lightning bolts, the Milky Way, and if you see those beams of light coming out from behind the clouds, that's not from lightning. That is actually the setting full moon behind the thunderstorm, creating crepuscular rays at night. So if that moon was any higher up on the horizon, this shot may not have been possible because it would wash out the Milky Way and possibly wash out the lightning bolts that struck there. This shot right here is 14 millimeters. I believe the settings were f2.8, 30 seconds, and an ISO 2000. More night sky stuff. If you get higher up latitude-wise, the aurora is absolutely fascinating. I've seen it probably a couple dozen times now, and this is in Iceland. It is so fascinating because it's different colors every time, different shapes, different motions, and that is, one, just really awesome to see with your naked eye, but two, when you're photographing it, you could find different compositions with the different shapes, and you can also shoot longer exposures to really bring out a little bit more motion in the aurora, or you could shoot shorter exposures to capture a little bit more defined emotion and, as far as curtains and pillars go. So when you're shooting the aurora, it's a life-changing experience. And when I'm shooting the lights, I always try and shoot these panos because when you're looking at it with your naked eye, I mean, it takes up pretty much the whole sky. So one frame usually doesn't do justice. This is Vesterhorn Mountain in southeast Iceland. It's the same mountain that you see over there next to the stage, but just a way cooler sky. And this is an 8-image vertical panorama that I shot out there. And the key with the Aurora is you have to be patient. It can literally turn on like the flip of a switch and turn off just as quick. And so this night I drove 7 hours across the country of Iceland in a desperate way to see the lights. And I got out here and there wasn't much going on, but literally with the flip of a switch, the lights turned on and I had a few minutes of them dancing above the mountain. And that was a pretty amazing moment. Another amazing moment is in Banff National Park. This was the craziest moment I've ever seen as far as auroras go. To give you an idea of exposure time, the previous shot was 8 or 6 seconds, I believe, for each frame at 4000 ISO f2.8. This shot, 1 second, 800 ISO f2.8. And then I did a panorama across the sky. This is 180 degrees right here. So the aurora was absolutely going crazy when I did this shot. Also, landscape photography. You put a lot of effort to get there. So don't just go walk up to the first pretty scene that you see. There's a lot more to be had. This is a very popular spot in Washington called Spirit Falls. It's got a great composition down at the bottom of the falls where you see the water moving towards you and you have a couple different layers. But when I found out that you could actually hike up to the top of the falls, I hiked on up there and hung my tripod and camera over the ledge very carefully and shot with a cable release over the ledge there. And I actually prefer this shot more than the previous shot because it just gives a different perspective and has a couple different elements that I like rather than the previous shot. So get out there, move around, and don't just settle on the first shot that you see. It's happened quite a bit where you get out there, you get excited, you shoot, you get the good light, and then you move 3 feet to your left and you throw your hands up and go, oh man, that was the shot. So moving around is so vital. Also, visiting places in different seasons. I like cold weather, if you guys haven't been able to tell from the previous images. This is Kirkjafall mountain in Iceland in the summer. It's got a nice green look to it, nice reflecting pond. But I like cold places, so I went back in the winter and revisited that same mountain when that bay froze over and threw on some waders, went out there Hulk style, did a couple Hulk smashes through the ice, and was able to find this composition where the ice kind of mimicked the shape of the mountain, and I was able to get just a little bit of the mountain reflecting in the water there. And this was actually quite difficult to shoot because that whole bay was moving with the wind, so all those ice chunks were moving around, so having a tripod set up on that, trying to do a somewhat long exposure, was extremely challenging. Also, you guys have heard the P word several times out here, not photography, patience. Patience is key when you're out there and you're shooting a landscape. This shot is White Sands again. I've never had much luck shooting this place during the day. So for my last visit out there in September, this is a compression shot using a 70 to 200. No clouds in the sky except for a very thin layer of cirrus clouds over the mountain. I thought this was all I was going to get. But instead of doing the hike back, I said, all right, listen to your own advice, be patient, stay out here. About an hour later, the sky clouded up, had a beautiful break on the horizon, and got this amazing glow coming into the valley, illuminating the tips of the dunes. And it only got better from here on out. The sky lit up pinks and reds and oranges. And if I had left and given up and not had fun out there, I would have missed this shot. Getting up in the air for nature photography is key. I'm really jealous of Captain Scott Kelly. I can only imagine what he's seen up there. But getting up in airplanes is as close as I'll get to being in the ISS here. So getting up high up there brings out a whole new perspective of these landscapes. This is real. This is a glacial river system in Iceland, and that's the real colors that you see there. The silt that mixes in with the water there creates different colors. Sometimes you'll have greens and blues. Sometimes you'll have whites. It's incredible to see this landscape from the air, because if you saw it from foot, it would literally just look like a flat landscape full of water. This shot was very nauseating, very dizzy to get. It took a lot of coordination between myself and the two pilots. We did about 30 minutes worth of donuts in a Cessna trying to get this shot lined up, and I wanted this other aircraft in the frame because it gives a good sense of scale and also adds a nice human element to the scene here. And when this frame actually happened, I had about 3 seconds to snap as many shots before he was in and out of our field of view. Details. Details in nature are huge. Don't get suckered in with just the wide lenses. Get the macro on, get the zoom on. Sometimes a 2-foot by 2-foot area of cooling lava can reveal some great details. The color in this shot would never have been seen with a wide-angle lens, a 14-millimeter lens. So throwing on a 70-200 or a 105 millimeter and zooming in can really, help bring to life a scene that may have otherwise not be seen. Keeping it simple, like a mountain sticking up above the fog. Not the greatest of sunrises, no clouds, but you have this beautiful mountain popping in through the fog. Love the color here, love the symmetry. But then also get a little crazy and chase a tornado or two. This is not a tornado. This is a supercell thunderstorm. I've been chasing tornadoes and supercells since I was 16, so pretty much when I got my car. I love storms. Each one is so different from the previous one. And if you find some sort of foreground element to bring into those storms, it's amazing. This shot here was out in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, Leoti, Kansas, if anybody's from there. It's far southwest Kansas. Had nothing to work with as far as like old barns or anything like that. So I was driving along, saw this dirt field on my left, and immediately it turned green on the other side of the road. So I knew if I did what any smart photographer would do, and that's put your tripod on top of a car during a lightning storm, I could get a beautiful shot of this road leading up towards a storm and some nice color contrast on both sides. So that's what I did, and I very quickly got down. Sometimes I don't want to get that close to a tornadic storm. This storm in Texas had softball-sized hail. Neither myself or my car liked that, so we stayed pretty far back, and I was able to get this is basically a 16-image panorama. I shot 8 images vertically for the bottom half of this storm, and then 8 images vertically for the top part, stitched the two together, and then had this final image here. This storm, the things I love about it is an hour later, this was nothing. It had completely dissipated. So to capture storms is to capture something that nobody else will ever be able to see again. Foreground elements are pretty far and few out there, and especially when you can't control a storm. I wish I could. I would have some really, really amazing images if I could pull a storm in front of some barns that I want to shoot it with. But finding roads are great leading lines out there as well. And also, being patient with these storms, because this storm, there was nothing going on until right about sunset, and it absolutely exploded. And what you see here is a mesocyclone. I know, nerdy words, minds are blowing right now. Mesocyclone is the whole area on the left-hand side of the frame that's rotating. That's where your tornado is going to form from. On the right-hand side of the frame is your downdraft area. This is where your rain's falling, your hail's falling. There's a little gap in between, so I was able to get some sunset light to come in to that gap there and light up the storm nice and pink, nice and orange. It changed quite rapidly, and this is another shot where I tell people, I'm like, please don't go out immediately and say, hey, I heard Mike's speech on shooting storms, I want to go do it. You don't see it, but there's a giant tornado in there. And there's a reason that I'm this far back. It's because that tornado is wrapped in rain, and there is no way for me to see it. And just safety comes first. So speaking of safety, I've been photographing storms for quite a few years now, so I've wanted to start experimenting about bringing in a human element. And this shot here was taken up in Wyoming. A beautiful storm, non-tornadic, just had some high winds to it. So I said to myself, hey, there's no foreground, there's no leading lines, nothing here. Well, let me throw out my buddy Barrett, who had never really chased storms before. So I told him, Barrett, hey, can you go stand in this field for me? I'd love to get a photograph of you with the storm. So he goes out into the field. I'm down on the ground, and it's showing some great scale, and it's showing that tie between man and nature, but it's not working. He's too low, and so his head's kind of sticking up above the horizon. So once again, I did what any wise photographer would do and hopped on the car with a metal tripod in the middle of a thunderstorm. Took this photo of him, it separated him from the horizon and gave him this really small scale versus really big storm. Worked out nicely. I jumped down so quick, I was so excited with the way it worked out. I hopped in the car, shut the door, started looking over the images. 5 minutes later, I realized he's still standing out in the field. So called him in. Another shot that I did, this was a couple years ago. This was an idea that was a few years in the making, but it took everything to come together perfectly to create this image. I needed a beautiful storm that was moving slow in an open field that did no damage or destruction or took anybody's lives. I needed a safety route. And then I know I don't look as good in a white dress standing in the field, so I needed a friend, to go stand in the field wearing a dress as well. For this shot, I really wanted to go more the portrait style and to create kind of a dreamy feel here. So I shot this at f5.6 with my focus on my friend Elizabeth, and that created that nice soft depth of field between her and the tornado, and yes, that is a real tornado out there. If I shot it at a higher aperture, I feel like I would have lost that kind of dreamy feel, and people's eyes would have gone to the tornado and her, and you would have had this battle. So shooting at a softer depth of field creates separation between her and the storm and brings your focus to her. I do shoot tornadoes without people in front of them as well. I don't necessarily like these shots. They are, nature shots, but this is a shot indeed where people are losing their lives and their property, but it is nature, so I do feel the need to shoot it. And I did a lot of journalism work back when I was shooting these kind of images, so that's what it went to. Once again, being aware of what you're dealing with when you're out there with severe weather is so vital, because 5 minutes later, this tornado was a mile wide and grew into an EF4 tornado, which is the second strongest tornado that's on the scale. When I shot this shot, I knew I had nothing to work with foreground-wise, until I saw this crazy, crazy, crazy truck driver. If you look at the bottom of the tornado, just to the right of it, you see this little itty-bitty tow truck driver. Yeah, that guy's driving. So when I saw him, I made sure to capture him in the frame, a little bit of scale. When I saw it, though, later on, I was like, man, what I would have given to be in his car with a 14-millimeter lens. But yeah, so tornadoes and storms, you can't always plan perfectly with foreground and stuff like that, but you can take what is put in front of you. Last but not least, lightning. Does anybody want to take a wild guess, since we have 2 minutes left, of how wide lightning is? Anyone? No? Everybody's shy all of a sudden. 1 inch. Lightning is 1 inch wide. So to be able to photograph that is awesome. It's also 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun. This is a 14-millimeter shot at f8, 400 ISO, and shot on the cable release on bulb mode. The reason I shot at f8 is because I was looking this day to capture those big lightning bolts. I didn't want the little ones that were way off in the distance. They didn't really do much for me. I was looking for those really close strikes, and I put myself in a position on this storm where I was really close to where the lightning was striking. I was doing it safe, though. I was in the car. But just goes to show you how awesome nature can be, or how much of a tease it could be. Once I got this shot, which is not a composite, and this is not multiple strikes in one shot, this all happened at once. After I got this shot, the storm completely died, and there was no more lightning from this storm. So with that said, these are some images that I've shot over the past few years of my experiences out in nature, everything from severe weather, volcanoes, waterfalls, and so on. And I want to leave you guys with one thought to think about, though. It's not about, at the end of the day, it's not about celebrating, capturing an amazing image. It's more so celebrating the journey in which it took you to get that image. So when you guys go out there and shoot, have fun with it, enjoy it, be patient, and thank you guys for your time.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Mezeul II. Stick around, we've got one more program today.